At precisely 04:17 UTC this morning, Iran executed the single most catastrophic offensive action in the history of modern warfare, an action so devastating, so irreversible, and so strategically transformative that every military command center on Earth is currently operating under emergency protocols that have never been activated before. The Islamic Republic has successfully detonated a nuclear-yield electromagnetic pulse weapon in low Earth orbit directly above the Pacific theater, instantly rendering blind, deaf, and paralyzed the entire United States military satellite constellation supporting operations across half the planet. 17 reconnaissance satellites providing real-time intelligence to U.S. Pacific Command are completely dead. 42 GPS satellites that guided every precision weapon system in the American arsenal have ceased transmitting navigation signals. 12 communication satellites that link the Pacific Fleet to Pentagon Command Authority have gone permanently silent. The most powerful military apparatus ever assembled by human civilization has been technologically lobotomized in a single coordinated strike that lasted less than 8 seconds. The electromagnetic pulse weapon, designated NOR-3 by Iranian Aerospace Force engineers, was lofted into position aboard a satellite carrier vehicle that Western intelligence agencies had categorized as a civilian communications platform for the past 14 months. That assessment was catastrophically wrong. The device that detonated over the Pacific was a sophisticated nuclear-enhanced electromagnetic pulse weapon with an estimated yield of 475 kilotons, designed specifically to generate maximum electromagnetic effect across the broadest possible orbital spectrum. The detonation altitude of 487 kilometers placed the weapon in the precise orbital zone that maximizes electromagnetic saturation across both military and civilian satellite constellations, while remaining below the threshold that would trigger debris cascades affecting Iranian allied space assets. The immediate consequence is that every United States carrier strike group operating in the Pacific theater, every guided missile destroyer, every nuclear attack submarine, every strategic bomber squadron, and every forward deployed Marine Expeditionary Unit has lost satellite navigation, satellite communications, and satellite reconnaissance capabilities simultaneously. The Pacific Fleet is navigating by celestial observation and inertial guidance systems not primarily relied upon since 1987. The Pentagon has lost real-time intelligence visibility across the entire Western Pacific, the South China Sea, the Korean Peninsula, and the Taiwan Strait simultaneously. American forces are operating with situational awareness capabilities degraded to levels not seen since the pre-satellite era of military operations. If this channel has been giving you the analysis that cuts through the noise of official narratives and mainstream defense commentary, now is the moment to make sure you never miss an update. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with everyone in your network who is serious about understanding what is actually happening at the sharp edge of global power competition. Because what unfolds from this moment forward will determine whether American military hegemony survives the decade or collapses into strategic irrelevance before the year concludes. The weapon system that Iran just employed represents the culmination of a 15-year development program that integrated North Korean miniaturization technology, Russian electromagnetic pulse weapon design specifications, and indigenous Iranian orbital mechanics expertise. The NOR-3 electromagnetic pulse device is fundamentally different from the improvised nuclear weapons that previous assessments had assumed would constitute Iran's space-based threat capability. This is not a crude fission device repurposed for electromagnetic effect. This is a purpose-built strategic weapon optimized specifically to destroy satellite electronics through electromagnetic saturation, while minimizing radioactive fallout that would create long-term orbital debris hazards. The technical specifications are staggering in their implications for American military capabilities. The electromagnetic pulse generated by the NOR-3 detonation achieved field strength measurements exceeding 50,000 volts per meter across the entire low Earth orbit band between 200 and 800 kilometers altitude. Satellite electronics are typically hardened to withstand electromagnetic interference up to approximately 10,000 volts per meter. The pulse that just swept through the Pacific orbital corridor was 5 times beyond the protection thresholds that American satellite designers had considered adequate. Every unshielded circuit board, every sensor array, Every communication transponder and every power regulation system aboard U.S. military satellites within the affected zone has been permanently destroyed by electrical overstress that exceeded component ratings by orders of magnitude. The satellite constellation that just died represented cumulative acquisition costs exceeding $340 billion and operational capabilities that American military planners had considered absolutely fundamental to power projection. The KH-11 reconnaissance satellites that provided meter-resolution imaging of adversary military facilities are gone. The advanced extremely high-frequency communication satellites that provided jam-resistant command links to nuclear forces are silent. The GPS Block 3 satellites that enabled precision weapon guidance are no longer transmitting navigation signals. The space-based infrared system satellites that detected ballistic missile launches are blind. The constellation that took 4 decades to build, and that constituted the technological foundation of American military supremacy, has been eliminated in the time it takes to read this sentence. The operational implications cascade across every dimension of American military capability in the Pacific theater. Carrier strike groups that relied on satellite reconnaissance to track Chinese naval movements are now operating with surveillance horizons limited to organic radar and aircraft reconnaissance ranges of approximately 400 nautical miles. Attack submarines that use satellite communications to receive targeting updates are now dependent on extremely low-frequency radio systems with data transmission rates measured in words per minute rather than gigabytes per second. Bomber squadrons that planned strike packages using satellite imagery acquired hours before mission execution are now flying with intelligence that may be days old by the time weapons are released. The entire operational architecture of American military power in the Pacific has been degraded to capabilities that would have been considered inadequate in 1985. The cost exchange ratio that Iran has achieved through this strike represents strategic asymmetry so profound that it redefines what is possible in contemporary military competition. The NOR-3 electromagnetic pulse weapon, including the satellite carrier vehicle, the orbital insertion capability, and the complete development program, cost Iran approximately $8 billion across 14 years of effort. That single weapon has just destroyed American satellite assets worth $340 billion while eliminating operational capabilities that cannot be reconstituted in less than 7 years, even if funding and industrial capacity were immediately mobilized. Iran has achieved a 121-to-1 cost exchange ratio against the most expensive and sophisticated military space architecture ever constructed. The targeting geometry of the strike reveals planning sophistication that demonstrates Iranian Aerospace Force planners had access to comprehensive orbital mechanics modeling and precise satellite constellation positioning data. The detonation occurred at the exact orbital position and the exact moment in time that maximized electromagnetic effect against U.S. military satellites while minimizing impact on Chinese, Russian, and Iranian-aligned space assets. The orbital parameters were calculated to place the electromagnetic pulse directly in the path of ascending GPS satellite orbits and synchronous with reconnaissance satellite overhead passes. This was not opportunistic targeting. This was deliberate optimization that required months of preparation and access to satellite tracking data that should have been unavailable to Iranian intelligence services. The Pacific Fleet that is currently navigating without satellite support represents 145 surface combatants, 38 nuclear attack submarines, 4 nuclear aircraft carriers, and approximately 280,000 personnel operating across the largest ocean on Earth, with situational awareness that has been catastrophically degraded. Every tactical decision that commanders make from this moment forward must be made with incomplete intelligence, degraded communications, and navigation systems that cannot provide the precision that modern weapons require. The fleet that was designed to dominate the Pacific through technological superiority is now operating with technological capabilities inferior to those available to Chinese forces who maintained operational satellite constellations, specifically because they were not within the electromagnetic pulse-affected zone. The question that every American military planner is asking right now is whether Iran executed this strike alone or whether this was a coordinated operation with Russian and Chinese strategic planning support. The timing is too precise, the orbital mechanics are too sophisticated, and the strategic impact is too perfectly optimized against American Pacific capabilities to have been executed without access to the comprehensive space situational awareness that only major space powers possess. If Russia and China provided the targeting data, the orbital mechanics calculations, and the detonation timing that made this strike possible, then what the world is witnessing is not an Iranian operation, but a coordinated assault by the anti hegemonic powers against the technological foundation of American global military dominance. The political paralysis in Washington is already evident in the delayed and incoherent official statements that have been released in the 6 hours since the detonation occurred. The initial White House statement described the event as a space debris incident under investigation. The subsequent Pentagon briefing acknowledged electromagnetic anomalies affecting satellite operations, but refused to confirm hostile action. The most recent statement from U.S. Strategic Command finally admitted that Iran had conducted a nuclear detonation in space, but described it as an isolated event that would not significantly impact operational capabilities. Every statement has been a transparent lie designed to conceal from the American public that the nation's military satellite constellation has been catastrophically destroyed and that no plan exists to respond proportionally to the attack. The strategic calculus that would govern any American military response has been fundamentally transformed by the satellite constellation destruction. Every long range precision strike capability that the United States would employ against Iranian nuclear facilities relies on satellite navigation, satellite reconnaissance, and satellite communications. Those capabilities no longer exist in reliable form. The bomber squadrons that would execute strategic strikes cannot navigate to targets with sufficient precision. The cruise missiles that would destroy underground facilities cannot receive mid course guidance updates. The reconnaissance capabilities that would perform battle damage assessment are not available. Iran has created a situation where the American military cannot effectively retaliate against the very action that has crippled American military capability. If you want analysis this sharp, this deep, this willing to challenge official narratives, subscribe now to ensure you never miss an update. Because what comes next will determine whether the Pacific security architecture survives or whether American military presence in the region becomes strategically irrelevant within the current fiscal quarter. The Chinese response to Iranian electromagnetic pulse operation has been studied silence combined with subtle but unmistakable military repositioning. In the 18 hours since the detonation, People's Liberation Army Navy units have increased patrol activity in the South China Sea by 340% compared to monthly averages. Chinese strategic bomber flights along the first island chain have increased from routine training patterns of 2 to 3 weekly sorties to continuous rotations maintaining 8 aircraft airborne at all times. The electromagnetic spectrum monitoring stations that China operates throughout the region have been transmitting at levels consistent with comprehensive intelligence collection against all U.S. military communications that are now being conducted through degraded backup systems. China is watching with intense focus to understand exactly how degraded American operational capabilities have become. The Russian Ministry of Defense has released a statement expressing concern about nuclear weapons use in space while simultaneously noting that all Russian military satellites continue operating normally because they were not within the affected orbital zone. That statement is a barely coded message to every nation observing this crisis. Russia is signaling that the strike was precisely targeted, that Russian space assets were deliberately protected, and that the coordination between anti hegemonic powers extends to the most sophisticated levels of space warfare planning. Russia is telling the world that what just happened was not an isolated Iranian action, but a coordinated operation within a broader strategic framework. The North Korean state media response has been even more revealing. Pyongyang has released detailed technical analysis of electromagnetic pulse weapon effects on satellite electronics, analysis so specific and accurate that it could only come from direct involvement in the weapon development program. North Korea is openly acknowledging its role in providing the miniaturization technology and electromagnetic pulse design specifications that made the North 3 weapon possible. Kim Jong-un is signaling that the Democratic People's Republic possesses the technical capability to execute similar strikes against any satellite constellation anywhere in orbital space. Israel faces the most immediate operational crisis resulting from Iranian electromagnetic pulse strike against American satellites. Every Israeli defensive architecture against Iranian ballistic missiles relies fundamentally on early warning data provided by U.S. space-based infrared system satellites and targeting coordination enabled by American reconnaissance satellites. Those capabilities no longer exist. The 11 minutes of warning time that Israeli air defense networks previously enjoyed before incoming ballistic missiles reached Israeli airspace has been reduced to approximately 90 seconds, based solely on ground-based radar detection. The Arrow 3 exo-atmospheric interceptors that defend against Iranian ballistic missiles require targeting data quality and precision that satellite reconnaissance provided. That data is no longer available. Israel's multi-layered air defense system has been degraded from comprehensive coverage to emergency improvisation. The Saudi Arabian leadership is conducting emergency consultations to assess whether continued alignment with American security guarantees remains strategically viable when the United States cannot protect its own satellite infrastructure from Iranian attack. The Gulf Cooperation Council nations that have relied on American military presence to balance Iranian regional influence are questioning whether that presence retains meaningful deterrent value when Iranian capabilities have proven able to blind American forces across an entire theater. The regional realignment that has been developing gradually for the past 5 years may accelerate into wholesale abandonment of American partnerships within the next 6 months. Turkey is already signaling diplomatic repositioning through immediate outreach to Tehran, proposing expanded bilateral cooperation frameworks. Ankara is calculating that Iranian demonstrated capability to strike American space assets without triggering effective retaliation represents a fundamental shift in regional power distribution. Turkey is hedging against American decline by establishing improved relations with the power that just demonstrated it can operate militarily against the United States without facing proportional consequences. Pakistan is conducting its own strategic reassessment of nuclear weapons doctrine in light of Iranian demonstration that space-based electromagnetic pulse attacks can be executed without triggering nuclear retaliation from the targeted power. If the United States does not respond to Iranian nuclear detonation in space with strategic retaliation against Iranian territory, then Pakistan must reconsider fundamental assumptions about nuclear deterrent stability and the threshold at which nuclear weapons use triggers civilizational warfare. The precedent being established in real time is that nuclear weapons can be employed for strategic effect against space assets without necessarily initiating general nuclear war. The Global South is interpreting this entire sequence of events as definitive evidence that American technological supremacy is not permanent, that American military power can be challenged successfully, and that the unipolar international order is transitioning toward multipolar reality faster than official narratives acknowledge. Every nation that has chafed under American pressure, every government that has resented conditional aid packages, every population that has experienced American military intervention is watching Iran operate militarily against the United States without facing the catastrophic retaliation that previous generations assumed would automatically follow such actions. The satellite replacement timeline that American space industry and military planners are developing demonstrates that the strategic impact of Iranian electromagnetic pulse strike will persist for years rather than months. The manufacturing capacity to build reconnaissance satellites exists at a rate of approximately 4 satellites per year across the entire American industrial base. The Pacific Theater satellite constellation that was just destroyed comprised 17 reconnaissance platforms. Reconstitution to previous capability levels requires minimum 4 years, assuming immediate funding authorization and zero manufacturing delays. GPS satellite production capacity supports approximately 8 satellites annually. The 42 GPS satellites destroyed require minimum 5 years to replace. The communication satellite constellation reconstitution requires minimum 3 years. American military space capabilities in the Pacific will remain degraded compared to pre-strike levels until 2030 at the earliest. The budgetary implications are equally devastating. The satellite replacement program will require supplemental appropriations exceeding $425 billion spread across 7 fiscal years. That funding will compete with every other defense priority in an environment where the federal budget is already strained by existing commitments. The political coalition required to authorize spending of that magnitude does not currently exist in Congress. The satellite replacement program will be delayed, underfunded, and subject to the procurement inefficiencies that have plagued every major defense acquisition program for the past 3 decades. The timeline estimates are optimistic. The realistic expectation is that American military space capabilities in the Pacific will remain significantly degraded for the next decade. Subscribe to this channel because in a world this dangerous, analysis this sharp is not optional, it is necessary. Share this with everyone who needs to understand what is actually at stake in the greatest strategic crisis of the 21st century. Tonight, history did not merely turn a page, it slammed the entire book shut and set it on fire. Iran has demonstrated that American technological supremacy is an artifact of an era that has already ended. The satellite constellation that enabled global power projection is gone. The operational capabilities that allowed the United States to fight wars with minimal casualties through precision strike are eliminated. The intelligence architecture that detected threats before they matured is blind. The world will never be the same because the foundation of American military dominance has been destroyed by a nation that the United States had categorized as a regional power incapable of strategic action at this level. The question that will define the next decade is not whether the United States can rebuild the satellite constellation that was destroyed, but whether American political will and economic capacity can sustain the effort required to compete militarily in an environment where technological superiority is no longer assured, and where adversaries have demonstrated both the capability and the willingness to strike at the most critical vulnerabilities in American military architecture. Has Iran permanently altered the global power balance, or will Washington find a way to reconstitute space dominance and reassert hegemonic control? Your engagement keeps this work independent and sharp. Comment below with your assessment of where this goes from here. Stay sharp, stay ahead, and never stop asking the questions that matter.